hate you, Daniel!
I hate you too.
Yo!
They sat in the same room, but felt miles apart. Daniel stared at the wall. Sarah stared at the floor. The argument had ended 30 minutes ago, but the silence that replaced it was somehow louder. All it would have taken was 3 words, just 3 words. I am sorry. But neither of them could say it, and that small moment, that single stubborn silence, could cost them the next few years of their lives. This is the story of Daniel and Sarah, two people who loved each other deeply but loved their pride even more. If you have seen them together 2 years before that night, you would have believed they were made for each other. Daniel was the kind of man who showed love through actions. He remembered the small things. He drove Sarah to her early morning job interviews when she was still building her career. He learned how to cook her favorite meal, jollof rice with fried plantain, even though he burned the first 3 batches before he finally got it right. Sarah was the kind of woman who made a room feel warmer just by walking in. She believed in Daniel when he doubted himself, when he lost his job in 2021 and spent 3 weeks too ashamed to talk about it. She did not pressure him. She just sat beside him one evening and said quietly, I am not going anywhere. Their friends called them solid. Their families assumed the wedding was just a matter of time. Even strangers who saw them laughing together at markets or sitting close in restaurants could sense that what they had was real. They were not perfect, but they were good together, and they both knew it. That is what makes what happened next so painful. It started over something small, the way most real damage always does. It was a Friday evening. Daniel had promised to attend Sarah's work dinner, a small celebration for a promotion she had worked 2 years to earn. He had promised. She had reminded him twice that week. She had even sent him the address the night before. But work pulled him in a different direction. A late client call turned into an emergency presentation. By the time Daniel looked at his phone, it was 9:47 p.m. and Sarah's message had stopped coming. When he got home, she was already there, quiet. That particular kind of quiet that is not peaceful. It is heavy. I waited for you, she said. I kept telling everyone you were coming. Daniel was tired. He was frustrated and insisted of leading with an apology. He led with an explanation. You know how my work is, Sarah. This was not something I planned. It is never something you plan, Daniel, but it always happens. The words landed harder than either of them expected. What followed was one big explosion. It was something worse. A slow, cold back and forth where both of them said things designed to protect themselves instead of protect the relationship. Daniel said she was too sensitive. Sarah said he never truly prioritized her. Both statements carried a small grain of truth, but the way they were delivered, sharp, defensive, and proud, turned those small grains into wounds. By midnight, they had both gone silent, not because the issue was resolved, but because both of them had reached the same stubborn decision. I am not apologizing first. The next morning, Daniel woke up expecting Sarah to say something she did not. Sarah waited that afternoon for Daniel to call. He did not. By Sunday, something strange had happened. The argument itself was almost forgotten. What replaced it was something more dangerous. A battle of wills. Who would break first? Who cared less? Who had more pride? Their mutual friend, Emeka, noticed everything. He called Daniel on Tuesday evening. Bro, what's going on between you and Sarah? She looked stressed. Daniel kept his voice casual. We just had a disagreement. She'll be fine. Did you apologize? Silence. Daniel, she owes me an apology too, Emeka. It was not all my fault. Emeka paused for a long moment. Then he said something that Daniel would not understand until much later. In a relationship, being right is not always the most important thing. Sometimes the most important thing is choosing the other person over your ego. Daniel laughed it off. He told himself Emeka did not understand. Meanwhile, Sarah was having a similar conversation with her friend Ngozi. Let's call him first, Ngozi said. You know how Daniel is, he finds it hard to reach out. And I find it hard to keep being the one who always softens first. Sarah replied, if he cared enough, he would call. The fact that he had not told me everything, and so the wall between them grew taller. 1 week has passed, then 2. 2 weeks became a month. A month of two people who loved each other choosing silence over surrender. Daniel threw himself into work. He told himself he was building his future, and in many ways he was. He earned a promotion. He moved into a better apartment. From the outside, his life looked progress. But there were Friday evenings when he would come home to a quiet apartment and feel a particular kind of emptiness that success could not fill. He would find himself thinking about something small. The way Sarah laughed at her own jokes before she finished telling them. The way she always fell asleep during movies but insisted she had been watching. He told himself he was over it. He was not. Sarah, on her own side, tried to move forward too. She took a new contract job. She traveled with Ngozi for a short trip. She smiled in photos and posted them. She filled her days with movement so she would not have to sit still long enough to feel the loss. But there were moments, quiet ones, when she would hear a particular song or smell jollof rice cooking nearby, and something in her chest would tighten without warning. She told herself she had made the right decision by not apologizing first. The quieter voice kept asking, was protecting her pride worth losing him? Neither of them reached out, and time, which does not care about feelings, kept moving. Months became a year. A year became 2. It was Emeka's birthday dinner that brought them back into the same room. Daniel saw Sarah from across the restaurant. Before she saw him, she was laughing at something someone had said. Her long hair was down. She looked well. She looked like she had moved forward. Something about that sight, her being okay, hit Daniel in a way he had not expected. He had spent so long assuming she was somewhere waiting, somewhere hurting, the same way he was hurting. Seeing her laugh freely made him realize that life had not paused for either of them. Sarah noticed him a few minutes later. Their eyes met briefly. Both of them offered the polite smile of two people who once shared everything and now share nothing. They spoke for about 4 minutes. Near the end of the evening, surface conversation. How is work? You look well. That kind of talk. But as Daniel drove home, that night, the truth settled over him, slowly and heavily like rain. He had lost her, not because they stopped loving each other, but because they both refused to be the first one to say sorry, because they had turned irreparable argument into a permanent silence. Because they let days become weeks, become months, become years, each one of them waiting for the other to move and neither of them moving. He thought about the night of the argument. He thought about how tired he had been, how defensive, how he had led with excuses instead of empathy. He had been wrong. Not entirely, but enough, and he had known it even then. He just could not make himself say it. And now it was too late. Not because they hated each other, but because too much time had passed. Because they had both built new lives around the empty spaces the other person used to feel. Because some silences, when left too long, become permanent. He sat in his car outside his apartment for a long time that night, thinking about how the smallest words can carry the heaviest weight. I am sorry. 3 words, that is all it would have taken. 3 words on a quiet Friday night, and everything, all of it would have been different. Pride will tell you to wait. Pride will convince you that apologizing first means you lost, that your dignity depends on the other person breaking before you do. But here is what pride will never tell you. Relationships do not keep score, and the person who waits the longest does not win. They simply end up the loneliest. Sometimes love does not die because it runs out. It dies because 2 people with full hearts and stubborn silences wait just a little too long to say what's needed to be said. Daniel still thinks about Sarah sometimes, not with anger, with something quieter, something that feels like understanding that arrives too late. And somewhere, Sarah probably understands it too. The argument that started it all was never really about the dinner. It was about feeling valued. It was about feeling chosen. And all either of them had to do was say, I hear you. I am sorry. You matter more to me than being right. But pride would not allow it, and time does not give refunds. Now here is what I want you to think about. Was it Daniel's fault for missing the dinner and not apologizing first? Or was it Sarah's fault for letting her pride keep her silent too? Or was it simply the fault of 2 people who both loved each other but loved their ego just a little bit more? Because the truth is, most of us have been Daniel or Sarah at some point. We have all sat in silence. We have all waited for someone else to move first. We have all let something beautiful get cold because we were too proud to warm it back up. So I want to ask you this. Has pride ever cost you something or someone you truly valued? Drop your honest answer in the comments. This is a safe space, and if this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. This story is now stored in the story vault.